Okay, a new tool that's just came out here in the fall of 2025 that's kind of exciting is the work overview tool. So if I pull this up, it's got my different categories of harvesting, seeding, application throughout the year. So if I look at harvest and I look at soybeans and I look at my progress here, it's going to tell me what my average acres harvested per day was. So I can see 102.9 acres a day. And then I can see how does that compare to my 5-year average. So 28% more acres per day on average compared to what the 5-year average was. And then it gives you your total acres harvested and how that compares. And then we can look at the actual area harvested each individual day. So this is going to look basically across the whole season, how many acres did I actually do each individual day. So the black line is going to be my average that I had this year, and then the dotted line would be your 5-year average number. And then I can simply hover over each individual day on the calendar and see how many acres was harvested each one of those individual days. So we can see the best day for the year was 140.7 acres. So that's kind of neat to look at, making decisions and whatnot, how productive we are, if there's any opportunities for improvement there. Okay, another one that's just came out that's pretty interesting to look at is this yield by seeding date analysis within the work overview. So it's going to give me my overall average across all my acres, how that compares to the 5-year average, total bushels, how that compares to the 5-year average. But then it's going to plot all of the dates and fields on the calendar. So it's going to cross-reference what the yield was on that field and when that field was planted. So each one of these dots is essentially a field. So I can click here and see, when it was planted and what the yield was. And then it's going to give me a trend line here of kind of on average, how is my yield affected by seeding dates? So we hear all the time from universities and seed companies and whatnot, especially on beans, we want to plant our beans early and, there's some kind of yield impact to that. So this actually lets me look and see what my actual yield data is and how that trends over time. So we can see here on average, the black line is going to be the current year. We're right there, probably about, 66 bushel an acre for my April planted beans. And then when I get down into my kind of 1st of June beans, I'm down here in the, that 50, probably 55, 54 range. So this year we had about a 10 bushel per acre penalty from early planting to later planting. So some things, if you do replant a field, I do believe it does show up here a couple different times. So it'll actually have a dot for the first planted and the last planted. And then the dotted line, that's going to be your trend line for your 5-year average. So this year, you can see there was actually probably a little bit less of a penalty for planting late than what we have typically. So typically, planting earlier is even showing a higher likelihood. So April plantings typically running over 70, and then my end of May, June plantings typically still in that 55 or so range. So as we can see here this year and over a 5-year average, 10 to 15 bushel per acre gain from planting early. So this is pretty neat to look at with your own individual numbers. We can also look at yield by population planted, and we can look at yield by variety as well. So a lot of really good information in there to help me analyze what I did on the farm and help me make better decisions for years to come. So I can do the same thing with corn, just like I had for beans. So as we can see here, another general trend, earlier planting typically does good on corn as well. So in this case, from our earlier planted to our later planted, looking at, roughly a, 50 bushel difference between those two. So same thing with application. You can kind of see that overall progress here. So one thing about application is, especially during the early part of the season, if you got starter fertilizer on your planter, maybe you got two systems, it's kind of counting those acres, it's counting spraying, it's kind of compiling all of that stuff together when you're looking at that total acres per day, and then you can see, what the individual was each individual day. And same thing with seeding. You can see how many acres we're seeding per day on average, what our bigger days are. Maybe that helps us make some decisions on maybe what size of equipment we need for the acres that we're trying to get accomplished if we have a certain amount of days that we're trying to hit on our window. So a lot of really good information here in the work overview. As I said, this is a new tool for this year, so I encourage you to check it out for yourself and see what the numbers are on your operation.